G'day everybody, how are you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. Today we're here to talk about some rumours, some speculations, some articles that I've seen appearing on the internet over the last week or so regarding the potential of a Z50 Mark II. Now, I rate this rumour as potentially credible. The main reason being is that the Z50 is going to have its 5th year birthday in October. And of course, it's one of the few, if not the only camera now in Nikon's range of Z cameras to not have a USB-C port, which from a legal perspective in Europe might also be a consideration. It needs to be upgraded. Let's talk, speculate, ruminate on what the Z50 Mark II, if it's real, what might it be? Of course, the first thing that is probably likely to change, as I said, is that USB-C port will arrive on this camera. Also, I think it's likely that we would see the XPEED 7 arrive, as that allows all of the new technologies, or the technologies that Nikon choose they want to have in this camera, can now arrive. This includes a whole range of things, like the graphical user interface is slightly updated, very similar to the old ones, and it might include things like Nikon Imaging Cloud. Who knows at this entry-level price point? But from here, we have, I think, two opportunities. One opportunity is just to simply iterate fairly gently on where this camera is today, leave it at the price point it is, or perhaps make it even cheaper. Or the other option is to lean towards perhaps a more D500 version of this camera. Think about that. Think about the technologies that Nikon has available to it to be able to leverage a D500 camera that is even better than the D500 in a form factor like this. Now, for those that don't know, the Z50 is an APS-C camera. That won't change. A Z50 Mark II will be the same. Where could we start? Well, we could start, for example, with an APS-C version of the Z6III partially stacked sensor. It appears that that sensor is very fast, and we've heard birders talking about it and using the Z6III quite successfully. Partially stacked, or semi-stacked as I like to call it, appears to be fast enough, I would say, for this segment. I really doubt that we would see the fully stacked sensors that we find in, say, a Z8 or a Z9. That's okay, we've got what we need in a Z6III, but we're just going to use the APS-C version of it and cram a few more pixels in there. Now, cramming a few more pixels in there may or may not be as easy as we would like it to be. We've seen with a Z8 and a Z9, they are smaller photo sites, and Nikon has been able to create those and make them work as fully electronic cameras. Now, where will the megapixels go? Currently, this camera is 20.9 megapixels. Let's just call it 21 for the sake of this video. It could be 24, so then it could match the megapixels of the Z6III, which we're shooting on today with the 50mm 1.2S at 1.8, just for a little bit extra depth of field. Also, another option would be to go to, say, 26 megapixels that we found in the XH2S. The XH2S from Fuji was the first stacked APS sensor that we've seen, and I'm not sure that there's been any others on the market since then. I've read a fair bit on the Fuji APS-C 40 megapixel sensor, and I have to say, reviews are mixed on whether that sensor is just simply pushing the photo sites too hard because they're getting too small. That is essentially around a 100 megapixel 35mm equivalent sensor. That's how small the photo sites are. And just to keep in mind, that 26 megapixel sensor that is in the XH2S, that is actually the center portion, the APS-C portion of the 60 megapixel sensor that we find in an A7R5, A7R4, or in the Leica M11s, even the Sigma camera. They all use that same sensor. From my perspective, I think, we are pushing the envelope on photo sites, on diffraction, and so on. I just don't think it's Nikon's approach to push these sensors out to the 40 megapixels and the potential diffraction and the potential loss of quality that can happen with those enormous numbers. I believe Canon has 32 megapixel APS-C cameras in their line, and they seem to be doing pretty well. But of course, as they get faster and as they get higher ISOs, they do get noisier. And I think we've seen Nikon repeat this again and again. They value image quality over high megapixels. I think that seems to be their philosophy. Obviously, they're trading off different things here and there when it comes to sensors getting faster so that users can have faster frame rates because they're demanding that. Some users are demanding that. Even so, there's plenty of us that never shoot over single shot. I just simply really never put... I think I've put my high-speed shooting modes on like maybe 5 times in my entire career. I literally just shoot one frame at a time. So, but yes, there are plenty of users out there that want 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 60. I don't think that many people actually want 120 frames per second from what I've heard, people reviewing all of these different cameras. Nikon, like every other manufacturer, is having to trade off image speed, frames per second speed, with sensor quality. And these are tough trade-offs. These are tough. Which direction do you go in? Where is a camera aimed? I think what we're seeing over the last few years is Nikon is trying to provide sensors which are jack of all trades sensors. We've seen it in the Z9, the Z8, we've seen it in the Z6 III. They're covering lots of different people's needs. It's a tough balancing act and everybody's doing it slightly differently. I don't see a Z50 Mark II. I'd be very surprised if it was outside of the brackets of 21 megapixels to 26 megapixels. I'd be super surprised if it was outside of that. And it could be anywhere in that. But hey, why not be super surprised? You never know. The fact that the Fuji X-H2S is now something like 2 years old would mean that the technology, that sensor technology, will have become more affordable in that last 2 years. But obviously the X-H2S on launch was a far more expensive camera than the Z50 is today. There's a $1,000 or $2,000 difference in it. It's quite sizable. And thus, I think a slightly more expensive Z50 Mark II with a partially stacked sensor is possible. Couple that with the XPEED 7 and suddenly you've got a camera that may or may not have a mechanical shutter. If it's mechanical, it could be 10, 12, 14 frames per second like the Z6 III, and then in electronic like the Z6 III, it can go up to 20 frames per second. And at the sort of price point that this camera would be, I think it would satiate a lot of users, a lot of D500 users that have been waiting for the next step. And then, of course, that means that those users can start to get into all of the amazing Z glass, the 180 to 600, the 100 to 400, the 400 4.5, the 600 and the 800 PF lenses, and let alone the ever-growing third-party lenses, of which Tamron has now given us a handful of lenses, the latest native Z mount lens from Tamron being the 50 to 400. Now let's think about it. On APS-C, it's not cropping, it is cropped. That's how it lives its life. So 400 millimeters becomes a 600 millimeter field of view equivalent. Or you might get something like the 28 to 400 that Nikon released, again, giving you 600 millimeters field of view equivalent at the long end. And thus Nikon now have the lens lineup to match what's required for a D500 replacement in Z. They're the main things to me. Another interesting thing about this camera that I think will change is a flip down screen. What that meant is you can still use this as a forward facing screen. That's a forward facing screen. But what's cool about this design, and look how thin that is. That's like 15 millimeters, under an inch. It still had the standard tilt up and tilt down. So this was kind of like an early version of what we see now on the Sony cameras, where they can be forward facing as well as doing the tilting that we're used to. Yes, the Sony one has a few more axes, but that would be a way more expensive and a much larger mechanism. Nikon brought this to us 5 years ago. Pretty cool, I think. I would be surprised if this mechanism survived. And we will get more like the mechanism that we see in most cameras today, along with the ZFC, the Z30, the ZF, and the Z6III we're shooting on today. And that is just the flip forward style screen. They are the main upgrades that I would think that we would see. So I'll just repeat them again. The X-Speed 7, a new USB port, a new screen, and something new when it comes to the sensor. Now, if they go for the more entry-level iterative version, then yes, there might be an updated sensor, because that sensor in there is 5 and maybe even more years old. Definitely will get the change in USB port. I do think we'd probably get X-Speed 7, just so you get the new technology that comes with that. And there's the potential in a camera of this size that the X-Speed 7, if it's using less cores and the processor's clock speed is slower and the processor is actually more efficient, so you actually get more out of the traditional sized battery that we've found in these, which is the smaller size battery. It is not the ENEL15, whichever version. C is the current version. Now, if they went in the D500 direction, we may see them spring for an ENEL15, but if they go the iterative version, it'll all stay the same. But I think X-Speed 7 helps on a lot of fronts and would be more energy efficient. And then, of course, the other thing that we get from X-Speed 7, which I think is probably critical to lots of people, is, of course, improved focus systems. And the autofocus side of things alone would be enough for me to suggest that X-Speed 7 will come to a Z50 Mark II, and, well, it will come to all new Nikon cameras. I think it's a fair bet just based on the AF alone. There it is, Z50 Mark I, basically 5 years old. Z50 Mark II makes sense for a whole lot of reasons. Not only could it potentially service some D500 users, or if they go the iterative update, it certainly services the entry-level user, absolutely. And it sits in a different category from my perspective to the Z30, which does not come with an EVF, and some photographers simply won't want to do smartphone style photography just looking at the rear screen. And thus, this could become, if they just iterate it ever so gently, it could become an even more affordable entry-level camera. So we could go either way. I don't know. Or they could potentially go halfway between the two things we've just talked about there, that it's basically a D500 replacement with the same specs as the D500, which, to be honest, this camera already has pretty good specs. And just sticking the X-Speed 7 in it and getting that better autofocus might be enough for a lot of users. I think we're going to land in there somewhere. I think this rumor is credible. I think it's time for this camera to have an upgrade. I think the USB port needs to become a USB-C port, so I think that needs to happen as well. Let's hope we see something soon on that front. Please do let me know in the comments below, what are your thoughts around what you would like to see in the Z50 Mark II? Would you prefer to see it a more entry-level camera? And I know a lot of users in my comments, they talk about how they love taking the Z50 out because it's so light and so easy to use, and it has a beautiful sensor and thus giving us beautiful images. My last point about the Z50 or something in Nikon's APS-C range, I'd love to see at least one of their APS-C cameras have in-body image stabilization. I think if you're going to sell these as an option for some users who are really, they're just happy to be at that sensor size and they're happy to be at that megapixel range. I'd love to hear your thoughts about in-body image stabilization, megapixel size, X-Speed 7. What do you think will turn up in these cameras? And I want to talk about another thing that Nikon are doing as a parent. They have given us a massive price drop on some of their cameras in their red division. And most notably is the Komodo 6K X global sensor camera. Now, just wow from my perspective. Firstly, this camera is 6K. It is Super 35, which is APS-C size. This is a very common sensor size for the cinema industry. Cinema has different needs to photographers. It's 6K, it's global, and it has 16.5 stops of dynamic range. It shoots to CF Express Type B cards. This is a real wow moment to me because it is 6,995 US dollars, down from 9,995 US dollars. And this isn't a sale, this is a permanent price drop. This makes this camera, which is Netflix approved and has been used on countless high-end Hollywood, Netflix, Disney, whatever productions, here it is at a price that brings it very close to an A9 III, very close to an R1. And the A9 III, it doesn't shoot 6K global. It doesn't have 16.5 stops of dynamic range. But really, this is not my point in regards to this, is to how it compares to the competition. My point about this is, what is Nikon's plan? What is their philosophy here? And what does this mean when we're talking about cameras? And no, Super 35 is similar to APS-C. They're almost exactly the same sensor size. And I don't think that sensor, I know we were talking about sensors, that sensor won't appear in a Z50 Mark II because it's a very expensive sensor. Unless they decide to sell the Z50 Mark II for, say, I don't know, $6,000 or $7,000. We might see it in a Z50 Mark V in, I don't know, 15 years' time, when the cost of technology, as it always does, it gets cheaper. But back to the point, what are Nikon doing here? They are giving all of us, anybody who's had a dream of making this sort of production, access to Hollywood level gear with a global shutter that appears to actually not come with compromise. This is really exciting that Nikon has this technology, and where are they going to apply it next? Their next high-end release is most likely to be the Z9II. The Z9 is coming up on its 3rd year birthday very soon. If it's existing in a 4-year cycle, my guess is it's something like 12 to 18 months we will see a Z9II. Now, Nikon are showing us they are very happy to make technology available at reasonable and affordable prices. And it's not just this moment. With the Z9, Nikon brought a class-leading sensor, a sensor that no one had ever seen before, that did not even need a mechanical shutter. Not only did they bring us that sensor and all of the other astonishing technology, 8K and NRAW and everything else, they brought it at a price that I think not even their competitors could make sense of. $5,500 US dollars instead of $6,000 or $6,500 US dollars. Why was the best camera of that time significantly cheaper than its competitors? And let's face it, Canon have only just arrived with the R1, and the R1 is not even here yet. And it's more expensive, and it's only 24 megapixels. That's a different video. My point is, Nikon seem to be being very aggressive about bringing cutting-edge technology, which the Z9 sensor was, at extraordinarily affordable prices. That was 3 years ago. Now they're doing it again. They are bringing us cutting-edge technology with this Super 35 global 16.5 stops of dynamic range camera, and it's at accessible prices for everybody that's interested in this space. Yes, you do have to spend a little bit more money on top of that to get a few bits and pieces, but that's the cinema industry. You think photography is expensive? Well, cinema is more expensive. Nikon are bringing us this technology. What does this mean for the Z9II? And what does this mean for, well, every other camera? Z9II is the most likely place we will see the next big step from a hardware perspective in a Nikon flagship. This doesn't include any new lines that might be created. And Nikon has publicly stated that they are planning on making red Z-mount cameras. So they're coming. Who knows what they might look like? Might they look like the Komodo X today, which has an RF mount, but it's simply got a Z mount? Or might there be something different? Might we see things more like an FX30 or an FX3? All of these options are open to Nikon, but to circle back to where I started with this, they want to bring it to us at extremely affordable prices. They did it with the Z9. They're now doing it with the Komodo X. I can't repeat this enough times. It is a global 6K, 16.5 stops of dynamic range camera. It's not a stills camera, so it's not a direct competitor to the A9 III, which is full frame and only shoots 4K video. but Nikon want to bring us this tech at affordable prices. And thus, I think the future is extraordinarily bright. Nikon now owns this tech. They now own this sensor technology. And we haven't even talked about the Raptor, which is the 8K global sensor camera. Yes, it's a lot more expensive, but Nikon own the tech. And obviously, they can use the engineering of that technology, and they can take that engineering wherever they want to take it. Z9II could be a very, very interesting camera. There's no question in my mind with that being, let's say, as much as 18 months away. There's no rule book that says it has to be 4 years. It could be 5, it could be 5.5, it could be 3.5. Sometimes that depends on competitors. Sometimes that depends on the technology that they want to bring to us that in R&D is working great, but when you've actually got to start mass producing, that's a lot harder than just making some prototypes. But let's say it sticks on schedule and it's around 4 or so years. I think we could see some very, very exciting technology in a Z9II, and global is perhaps the next conversation. I just wanted to talk about this price drop because I think it really indicates where Nikon's head is at, what they're trying to give to all of us. At various times in their history, they are giving us class-leading technologies at really affordable prices. So who knows what's next? The chess move and the machinations within the industry as a whole, this price drop would obviously be having to have a little bit of seismic ripples with some of their competitors. I think it's really interesting and really exciting from that perspective and from the perspective of what's next. Now, in light of that, I just want to read you a little quote here from Keiji Oishi, who is the new CEO of Red. And he's just made a statement about this price drop. Red's Komodo lineup has only grown in popularity over the years. Since joining Red, I have heard filmmakers rave about Komodo's small form factor and the amazing performance of the global shutter sensor. We're excited to introduce this new pricing, which lowers the hurdle for a new group of filmmakers to take advantage of the exceptional cinema quality and creative possibilities of Red cameras. Red always strives to create an accessible and reliable avenue for artists at any level to get their hands on premier cinema-grade imaging technology. The Komodo remains one of the most versatile and powerful camera systems that Red has ever developed, and democratizing image capture technology at this level will always remain part of Red's DNA. That is a really strong statement saying always that Red/Nikon's plan is to always bring class-leading technology, great technology like this, into the hands of everybody. I think this is a fantastic philosophy. I think Nikon aren't just saying it. This is not just marketing. They've actually done it. And the Z9 was an astonishing example of this from my perspective. It was a wow moment that continues to be a wow moment due to all the firmware that we've had, let's face it. And, well, they're putting their money where their mouth is. And as we say, actions speak louder than words. They have literally taken 30% off the price of the Komodo X, going from $10,000 down to $6,995. It's huge. It's saying a lot to the market, and it's saying a lot to us users. I just can't wait to see what's ahead, and I think the next 5 years are going to be very, very exciting. All right, I'd love to know your thoughts about the Z50 Mark II. Is that a credible rumor? What would you like to see yourself in the Z50 Mark II? Are you interested in the Z50 Mark II? And Red, what are your thoughts and reactions to this permanent, sizable price drop? And does this suddenly make you interested in getting a global Nikon Red camera? And everybody, just before you go, I'd just like to do a quick reminder about the affiliate links that I have below. 10% off at Nikon Australia, a discount at audio.com, which is the music, the beautiful music that you hear in my videos all the time for B&H. It doesn't cost you more, and sometimes it costs you less, and it actually really helps the channel. I was recently listening to Chris and Jordan from Petapixel, previously DP Review, previously The Camera Store, talking about their process and the fact that they'll film a video for a day and then the video will be edited for roughly a day. This is real. These are real numbers. The majority of my videos are 2-3 days in the making. And sometimes it's multiple, like half-day sessions just to collect all the B-roll and the stills to actually test these cameras. It's a big deal. And any support that you can give without it actually costing you anything, it's just with stuff that you're going to buy anyway, it's a big deal. And the way that the affiliate world works is it's just economies of scale. It's just lots of small amounts coming through to us that build up to something that helps support the hours and hours that we put into creating this content. And I love creating this content, but I also love paying my bills. And, you know, I think that's fair enough. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. It's been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, I'd love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. Okay. Z50 Mark II coming soon. I hope so. More fun. See ya.